Dear learners, welcome you again in this Swayam MOOC course on environmental politics, theories, concepts and debates. Week 7, Lecture 3, titled Overview of Multilateral Environmental Treaties and its Enforcement, in which we will be discussing the landmark treaties and conferences such as Stockholm Conference, then the Bertland Report, uh, Rio summits. Along with that, we will be discussing the Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement, and other conventions too. Along with that, we will be seeing that what is the role of soft laws or non-binding laws in the context of protecting environmental degradation. So let's begin, learners. So here we can see that the growing recognition of transnational environmental challenges has led to the emergence of different international treaties and agreements, which basically aims at fostering global cooperation between or among the different countries. In this regard, MEAS, that is the multilateral environmental agreements, are considered as an important milestones in this regard, and it basically provides legally binding frameworks to tackle the important issues, critical issues such as the climate change, biodiversity loss, ozone layer depletion. Along with that, it also discusses the chemical pollution. So here we can see that in this interconnected world, environmental treaties are essential for preventing ecological degradation, ensuring equitable solutions between or among the different nations, and also providing the safeguards for the future generation. So here we can see that one of the most prominent agreement is the Paris Agreement of 2015 in this context, which is basically a kind of landmark treaty under the UNFCCC, that is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it basically brought different nations together in limiting the rise of global warming. Another pivotal treaty is the Convention on Biological Diversity, that is also known as CBD, and it seeks to protect ecosystems, promote sustainable resource use, and also ensures the equitable benefit sharing from the genetic resources. So here we can see that beyond legal obligations, these agreements also foster technology transfer, financial aid for developing nations, and global policy alignment. Even we can see that non-binding agreements like sustainable development goals, which is very, very important in this regard, it guides nations towards sustainability through shared principles. Now here we will be seeing what are these multilateral environmental agreements. So here we can see that basically these are the mixture of combination of different international treaties, conventions, protocols, and other legally binding instruments between multiple countries. As we have seen that whether it is about the very first conference, that was the Stockholm Conference of 1972, or even it was the last Paris Accord or agreement, here we have seen the participation of multiple countries, and these MEAs basically designed to address the specific environmental issues or challenges, and for that purpose these are basically negotiated and adopted by the member countries, those who participate in it, that is just to initiate common framework principles and commitments among the countries. And here they basically focuses on addressing the shared environmental concerns at global or regional level. Here we can see that MEAs can cover a broad range of environmental issues, which includes biodiversity conservation, climate change, ozone layer depletion, chemicals and waste pollutions too. And here they are also presenting essential mechanisms for promoting international collaboration in addressing the critical environmental problems that transcend national boundaries. Means these all are beyond the national boundaries. Now here we will be seeing what are the key features of multilateral environmental agreements, and here we can see the very primary objective of it is that it addresses one or more clearly defined environmental problems. As we have seen that how the Kyoto Protocol was basically focusing on the climate change, and it only mainly focused on how to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases in a manner. So that's why it is very important. The MEs have also a kind of secondary objective, that along with the protecting the environment, they also focuses on other issues like poverty reduction or ensuring the sustainable development too. Secondly, we can see that these MEs are most of the time in a written form, fine, which is approved by each country's legislature or parliament. And along with that, we can see that these multilateral environment agreements are also governed by the international law. In this context, we can see the United Nations Environment Program, which was formed in 1972, and as we have seen that it was the outcome of Stockholm Conference, and it has been entrusted by the governing bodies of numerous multilateral environmental agreements, that is just to serve the designated entity for providing essential secretariat functions to these conventions. So here we can see that this UNEP is basically responsible for coordinating the responses to environmental issues within the UN system, and it also ensures the effective functioning and implementation of international agreements too. So now here we will begin with the landmark initiatives for environmental protection, and in this regard, firstly we will be discussing the Stockholm Conference. So here we can see that the Stockholm Conference was basically held in Stockholm, Sweden in 1972. Why it is very important? Because it was the very first initiative towards putting environmental concerns on the mainstream global agenda. If you people will see the background of this conference, so that time the Cold War period was going on, and within Cold War, that was the time of detente. As we have discussed in the previous lectures too, that how Joseph Nye, when he talked about the complex interdependence, and then after he had mentioned that how in the coming time the low politics will come into the mainstream and high politics will be the part of fringe. So it was basically in this regard we can see that Stockholm Conference was the first initiation in this regard. And along with that, we can see that here major issues such as air and water pollution and chemical toxicity were discussed at the global forum first time. Here, in this regard, we can see that the Stockholm Conference resulted in the Stockholm Declaration, which basically contains 26 principles. And here we can see that these principles are focusing on to inspire and guide the people of the world in the preservation and enhancement of the human environment, and also talks about the action plan containing 106 recommendations for environmental policies. And here we can see that, as I have already mentioned, that UNEP is the outcome of the Stockholm Conference, which was basically a new UN machinery to serve as a catalyst in evolving and coordinating an environmental focus in the programs of other organizations. Now we will be coming to the very important report that is called the Our Common Future report, presented by the Portland Commission in 1987, and it was a very remarkable report which has basically like opened the eyes of the world community. And here we can see that this report widely accepted the definition of sustainable development as what? As that key development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And here, this report also laid the groundwork for holding a global conference on the 20th anniversary at Stockholm Conference, which was materialized in form of Rio Summit in 1992. Now we will be seeing the Montreal Protocol, and this Montreal Protocol was basically on focuses on those substances which are responsible for the depletion in ozone layer, and it regulates the production and consumption of nearly 100 man-made chemicals referred to as ozone depleting substances, which is also known as ODS. The Montreal Protocol phases down the consumption and production of the different ozone depleting substances in a stepwise manner with different timetable for developed and developing countries. And here we can see that when these substances released into the atmosphere damage the stratospheric ozone layer, Earth's protective shield that protects humans and the environment from the harmful ultraviolet rays or radiation from the sun. So it was adopted on 16th September 1987, and the protocol is one of the rare treaties to achieve universal ratification. Now here we will be coming to the next convention, that is called the Basel Convention, and it was basically focused on to control of transboundary movement of hazardous waste and their disposal. So here we can see that it was basically adopted on 22nd March 1989 in Basel, Switzerland, and it was a kind of response to a public outcry protest following the discovery in 1980s, that is what, in Africa and other parts of the developing countries or world, of deposits of toxic waste imported from the abroad and specifically from the developed countries. And here the Basel Convention on the Control of Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Waste and their Disposal was created, that is just to protect the people and the environment from the negative effects of the inappropriate management of hazardous wastes worldwide. So that's why here we can see it is the most comprehensive global treaty, this Basel Treaty, dealing with hazardous waste material throughout their life cycles, from that is from production, transport to final use, and lastly disposal. In the same way, we can see the another important convention is the Rotterdam Convention, which was signed on 10th September 1998 and enforced on 24th February 2004. And it was on the prior informed consent procedure for certain hazardous chemicals and pesticides in the international trade. Along with that, we can see that it also provides parties, I mean the member states, with the first line of defense against the hazardous chemicals. Along with that, it also promotes the international efforts to protect human health and the environment as well. Along with that, it also focuses on enabling the countries to decide that if they want to import hazardous chemicals and pesticide listed in the convention or not. Now we will be coming to the last convention in this regard, which is very important, that is the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, which was adopted on 22nd May 2001 in Stockholm, Sweden, and entered into force on 17th May 2004. And here we can see that it was a very important convention which focuses on the protection of human health and the environment from the chemicals. What kind of chemicals? Hazardous chemicals that remain intact in the environment for longer period, and it become widely distributed geographically, accumulate in the fatty tissue of the humans and wildlife, and then after have harmful impacts on human health and the environment too. So it was basically exposed as the persistent organic pollutants, popularly known as POPs, can lead to serious health effects, which may include like cancers, birth defects, dysfunctional immune and reproductive system, greater susceptibility to disease, and also damages to the central and peripheral nervous system. So here we can see that how this the whole of this POPs has presented or has given a long range issue to the human survival and the environment too. Now here we will be seeing the in this context, here we will be seeing an important fact that the secretaries of Basel, Stockholm Convention, as well as the UNEP, which was the part of the Rotterdam Convention Secretariat, later on it was merged to a single secretariat with a matrix structure, serving the three conventions. All these three conventions now hold back-to-back conferences of the parties as a part of their joint synergies decision, which is very, very important. Now here we will be seeing the Rio Earth Summit, and here, as we have discussed, that as I have already mentioned, it was held in 1992 in Brazil, and it was attended by 100 head of the states and government, which was as the highest ever attendance in an international conference. And here we can see that why this Earth Summit is very, very important, because it had heightened the awareness of the negative impact on the environment of human activities, means the human caused hazardous impact on environment. So basically this Earth Summit has unveiled this fact in front of the world community. In this regard, we can see that two binding legal instruments were adopted on climate change and biological diversity. That was about the CBD, that is Convention on Biological Diversity, and here it was adopted at the time of Earth Summit on 5th June 1992, and it was enforced in 1993. And here we can see that the total number of parties which were participated in it, that was 187. And here we can see that this CBT basically sets out commitments for ensuring that the global ecology does not suffer from business of economic development. It means that it basically urges to make a balance between the environment and development. What kind of development? Economic development. And here we can see that the CBT has three main goals. That was about the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, and thirdly, the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits from the use of genetic resources. Here we can see that is the UNFCCC, which was basically came in 1992 and enforced in 1994, and it basically a convention on climate change which set on an overall framework for intergovernmental efforts to respond the challenges which are posed by the climate change. Along with that, it recognizes that the climate system is a shared resource whose stability can be affected by industrial and other emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. Another one which is very important, that is the UNCCD, that is the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And here it basically aims at the loss to protect the loss of biodiversity, and also identified it as the biggest challenge to sustainable development. The third one in it is the World Summit on Social Development, that is also as WSSD. And here we can see that the United Nations World Summit for Social Development, which was held in 1995 at Copenhagen, and it brought people as the center of the development. The government of different nations met here and discussed the three core of socio-economic issues which are very much important in the context of development, that is eradication of poverty, promotion of full employment, and also fostering the social integration. So now moving forward, here we will be come up to the next very important treaty, that is the Kyoto Protocol, that was basically adopted at the time of Conference of Parties which was held in Kyoto, Japan. And it is basically, it came into force in 2005, and here we can see that 39 industrialized countries which were enlisted under the Annexer 1 countries, and they committed themselves to reducing the emissions by 5.2% to the 1990s levels by 2012. And here we can see that this protocol set up mechanisms for carbon trading and the detailed rules for the implementation of the protocol. So here we can see that under this, a country can finance carbon dioxide saving measures in another country and thus offset its own emissions. Similarly, a country can buy carbon credits from another countries that has accumulated them by reducing emissions or through other measures like forestation. And this protocol also set up a fund for helping developing countries to help them in the context of climate change. So here we can see that it was adopted in the COP 7, that is the Conference of Parties 7 in Marrakesh in 2001, and that's why it is also referred as Marrakesh Accords. These amounted to an average of 5% against 1990s level over the 5-year period in phase 1, that is from 2008 to 2012, and the phase 2, that is from 2013 to 2020. And it also gave the target of reducing emissions by at least 18%, and it was fixed for the industrialized countries. And here we can see that the Kyoto Protocol includes 3 strategies to reduce emission levels. In this context, firstly we can see that is the joint implementation, and here this joint implementation is basically about allowing industrialized countries to facilitate the implementation of projects pertaining to reduction of the emission level. For example, we can see that if the German energy company investing in a wind farm project in Poland, that is to replace a coal fired power plant, means fossil fuel. And since Poland, which is also enlisted in Annexure 1 country, lacks sufficient funds for green energy, so Germany, which is also annexed in the and listed in Annexure 1 country, finances the project. So what is the result of it? It results in as emission reductions which are credited to Germany and helping its meet its target to meet it according to the Kyoto Protocol, while Poland benefited from cleaner energy infrastructure. So that is about the joint implementation. Then the CDM, that is called the Clean Development Mechanism, and it allows industrialized countries to implement projects which will reduce the emission level of developing countries. And in this regard, we can see that the developed countries are investing in developing countries regarding the project on rural electrification through solar panels, or also encouraging reforestation on the degraded land. And lastly, it is about the emission trading, and emission trading basically allows the industrialized countries to purchase assigned amount of units of emission from other industrialized countries to meet their emission target. Now here we will be coming to the Marquez Accord, as I had just mentioned its implementation date. So it deals with the capacity building for the representatives of developing countries to ensure their effective participation in the Kyoto Protocol. Along with that, here we can see that developing countries have the responsibility to identify their needs, and they have to cooperate with other developing countries, which is also manifested in form of South-South cooperation. Along with that, it stresses the cooperation between stakeholders, including regarding the inclusion of technology need assessment, technology information, enabling environment capacity building, and mechanism for technology transfer. And in this regard, we can see the UNFCCC's meeting in Bali, December 2007. And here, the government representatives from both the North and South countries agreed to set up their efforts to combat climate change, and also agreed to adopt the Bali Road Map. So here we can see that the Bali Action Plan centered on 4 building blocks, that is mitigation, then it is adaptation, technology, and financing. And here we can see that basically this mitigation is about strengthening the commitments for emission cuts by developed nation and voluntary actions by the developing countries. What is adaptation? It is basically about the enhancement of support for vulnerable nations to cope up with the climate impacts. Then the technology transfer, that is about the promotion of clean energy solutions through cooperation and innovation. And last one, that is the financing, and it is basically about mobilizing the funds to assist developing nations in climate actions. So this framework paved the way for Copenhagen Accord of 2009 and later on the Paris Agreement of 2015. So here we can see that this Copenhagen summit, which is also in form of accord, which held in 2009 and accepted the need to hold temperature increase below 2 degrees Celsius. And here non-annexer 1 countries also pledged to reduce emissions and establishes monitoring, reporting and verification mechanism. And lastly, we can see that it also provided a hope for effective implementation of international climate change agreements. Now we will be coming to the most important, the Paris Agreement, and here on climate change, which was adopted by the 196 countries at the UN, United Nations Climate Change Conference, that is in form of COP21, which was held in Paris, France on 12 December 2015, and it was enforced on 4th November 2016. It basically overarching goal is to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels, and also pursue the efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. And here we can see that in the recent years, world leaders have stressed the need to limiting the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. Here we can see that because the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change indicates that crossing the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold risk unleashing for far more severe climate change impacts, including more frequent and severe droughts, heat waves, and rainfall too. Now here we will be seeing what are the main features of this agreement. So here we can see the universal application, then here the principle of equity and the principle of CBDR and the respective capabilities. And along with that, it all were like legally binding agreement that will apply to those states that have expressed their consent or given their consent to be bound by the means of ratification, acceptance, approval and accessions. It means those who are, those countries who are giving their consent on these four, they are only bound by the norms of Paris agreement. And along with that, we can see that it also brought all nations together to combat climate change and adapt to its effect. In the continuation here, we can see that in the year 2020, a new post-2020 global biodiversity framework, that is as GBF, was negotiated under the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, and it basically defines the targets and pathways for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity for the coming decade. Now here quickly we will see that what is the role of soft laws and non-binding agreements. So here we can see that by nature these all are enunciation of a norm in a non-binding written form, and it means that it is not as binding as the other international treaties. Here we can see that hard international law generally refers to the agreements or principles that are directly enforceable by the national or international body. So here we can see that soft law is a core source of international law that emerged and developed rapidly in the current era of globalization. They are also providing flexible frameworks for cooperation, setting standards, and encouraging best practices among the states, organizations, and stakeholders too. So altogether, we can see that soft law is a non-binding agreement, recommendation, or resolution that can be issued by the states, NGOs, and other global entities like United Nations Environment Program. Now we have come up to the last portion, that was about the what is the role of it. So firstly we can see facilitating international cooperation, and here we can see that soft laws and non-binding agreements are often used to address global environmental challenges where consensus on binding commitments is quite difficult to achieve, and they provide a platform for dialogue and collaboration, especially in some of the major areas like climate change, biodiversity, pollution, ozone layer depletion. Like we can quote the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development of 1992, which is a non-binding agreement. Secondly, we can see setting norms and standards. So here we can see that the soft laws often establish norms and guidelines too that influence state behavior and corporate practices. And these norms can later evolve into binding agreements or to be incorporated into domestic legislation. Like we can take the example of the forest principles of 1992, which was actually adopted at the Earth Summit, and later on it was incorporated in the national policies of the governments. Then the third one is about the encouraging voluntary action. These laws often encourage voluntary action by the governments, corporations, and civil societies too, which can mobilize resources and foster innovation in environmental protection. Fourth, that is the building trust and capacity. And here, soft laws helping in building trust among the states and stakeholders by creating a shared understanding of environmental issues, and they also provide a foundation for capacity building and technical assistance. In this regard, we can take the example of the Global Compact 2000, which was an UN initiative to encourage the businesses worldwide to adopt sustainable and socially responsible policies. Then there is filling gaps in the hard law. So here, this soft law can also address emerging environmental issues where binding agreements do not exist, and they provide interim solutions and pave the way for future legal frameworks. And lastly, that is about the promoting inclusivity and participation. So here, these also involves a wider range of stakeholders, which may include non-state actors, or indigenous communities, or even the civil society too. And this inclusivity enhances legitimacy and implementation. In this regard, we can take the example of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is very, very important. So lastly, here we can see that soft laws and non-binding agreements are essential tools for environmental protection, offering flexibility, inclusivity, and adaptability. And they also complement binding legal frameworks and often serve as stepping stones toward more robust international and domestic environmental governance. So here we can see that the effectiveness of these agreements will depend on the political will of any country, along with the public engagement, how much people are like engaged, aware, and they want to do something in this, and also the adaptive governance in form of adopting the different initiatives in form of legislation. Along with that, we can see that environmental threats escalate. Global treaties must evolve to be more inclusive, equitable, and ambitious too. And here, their continued success is not just a legal or diplomatic issue. Actually, it is the necessity for our survival, for the environment, and as well as of our future generation. So these are the activity questions. These are the references which you all may use as further reading, learners. Thank you.